Well, good morning, St. Mark's. It is a pleasure to be here with you guys. If we've never met, I'm Sean. I usually get to sit right in the back over there in the student section. Yes, there they are, all our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. But today I am eager to be up here with you all as we continue our Christmas series talking about all the times in the life of Jesus when the door was closed to him, when people blocked him off and rejected him. Of course, building up to the famous story when there was no room for him in Bethlehem on Christmas Eve. Today's story feels very appropriate for the Christmas season because it is the story of Jesus going back to his hometown of Nazareth. And what I love about that story is that it's so much like us at Christmas. For so many of us, we are jumping on planes or traveling across the country or driving or going long distances to be home for the holidays. For others of us, you've got kids in town or other family in town for the holidays. There's something about Christmas where we all just kind of come home and we come together. And that's what Jesus is doing in this story. I remember growing up when I was in college, I would drive about 3 hours to make it home when Christmas break started. And I was so excited because the second I got home, it meant the return of home-cooked meals and the end of cafeteria food. And that might as well have been the second coming of Jesus. It was so good. So usually I would slip on the final countdown and try to beat the song to get back because I was so eager to make it in those last couple of minutes. I also remember then I started working at a church, and Christmas Eve is a big deal in the church world. And so I would jump in the car after the last service ended and I would drive through the night and make it in at midnight or 1 a.m. or something and go straight to sleep and then wake up the next morning and do Christmas morning with my family. And I always love those moments, such good memories of coming home for Christmas. But of course, Christmas is not without its traumas either. I must have been like 7 years old. I remember I was somewhere around that age. And my parents had told me on Christmas Eve, hey, tomorrow we're going to start Christmas and opening up gifts at 8. So I'm like, okay. So the next morning, I'm excited, I'm eager, I'm barely sleeping. I get up at 7. And in our household, you could open up the stockings before parents were awake. And so that's what I did. And I'm eating all the little candies that were in there. 7:30 rolls around. My dad gets up. He starts on breakfast. And the anticipation, the excitement is building. Then 8 o'clock rolls around. And my mom's not awake yet. Christmas morning is going to be at least 5 minutes late. 8:05 rolls around, 8:10 rolls around, 8:15 rolls around, and at this point, this is a DEFCON 6 level threat. And when you're 7, you don't have a lot of weapons in your arsenal. So I used the one that I had, and that was a temper tantrum. So there I am, Christmas morning, because Christmas is 15 minutes late, crying and ruining Christmas for everybody else. And my dad, being the kind, gentle soul that he is, pulls out a camcorder and records it. And this video still exists to this day. I'm hoping it stays lost in the family archives, but it's out there somewhere, just waiting for the perfect moment to show it to my kids or future wife. And I'm scared. And I guess my point is Christmas is not without its traumas, and I know that. And that was certainly true of Jesus in this story as he comes back to Nazareth, and as Nazareth rejects him. A little bit of background. Jesus, when he's somewhere around 30 years old, he leaves and he goes down to the Jordan River. He's baptized by John the Baptist, and he has just left Nazareth. He had lived there for many years, and then he goes down south. He's baptized. He spent some time in the desert in that story, if you're familiar with it. And then he goes on this speaking tour, where he kind of goes from town to town, city to city, village to village. And on the Sabbath day, he would preach in the synagogue. And in between, he would do miracles and wonders. And so stories are spreading of him. He's calling the disciples to him. People are beginning to follow him. A reputation is being built as someone who is preaching something new and exciting, something that is freedom to hear, and as someone who can do miracles that people have never seen before, restore sight to the blind, and heal people of injuries. And then Jesus decides to do something unique. He's on this speaking tour, and he decides to go to his hometown of Nazareth. Now, why is that weird? Well, it's weird because it is tiny. If you don't know, Nazareth probably has somewhere around 200 to 400 people. It's probably about 10 families, 10 extended family networks, all of whom are connected through friendships and marriages. And so it is small, it is insular, it is proud, it is hyper-religious, and it is mocked by the cities around it for being kind of backwards. It's very skippable if you're on a preaching tour, in other words. But Jesus goes back to his hometown. He goes there. And the people there know him. If you're familiar with the life story of Jesus, he probably lives in Bethlehem after he's born for somewhere around 2 years, we think. And then he lives in Egypt for about 7. And then his family moves back to Nazareth. And so from 9 to about 30, he's living in Nazareth. 21 years. He is spending time with these folks, and we don't have many stories from that time period. Really, we only have one. But from that time period, when he's 12 years old, from that story, we can learn 2 things. Number one, he's a master of the Old Testament. He understands it. He explains it. He knows it deeply and well in a way that is compelling and interesting to other people and in a way that is new. He's a master, a genius at it. And that makes sense, because he wrote it. So you would think he would know the Old Testament real well, right? And he does. But what you got to know about this is that back in those days in a hyper-religious community like this, being that good with the law and the prophets would be kind of like today being the starting quarterback of the high school football team. It brought reputation, it brought popularity, it brought excitement, it brought people looking up to you. From the same story, when he's 12, we learned that he was a good kid. People liked him. People enjoyed being around him, and they appreciated how kind he was. And he had a good reputation. Put those 2 things together, and he is the golden child. Person that people admired and looked at and hopefully was going to make something of himself. The person who was voted most likely to succeed, if you will. There was a lot of expectation going in. And then now he's left, and in a few short months later, he has returned home to Nazareth. And you would expect that when this golden child returns, now is this rabbi, apparently, who is this teacher building a reputation that no one has ever had from this tiny, tiny town from before. You would expect him to be the hometown hero, back with banners and flags and welcome home Jesus. But that's not what happens. The people reject him. Let's read the story of what happens in Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 14. This is what it says. Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit. A news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him, and he began by saying to them that today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. We're going to pause there for a second. The passage that Jesus just read is this ancient prophecy about the Messiah. And Nazareth knew that. They knew that what this passage is saying is that when the Messiah comes, he would be preaching a message that is good news, that is freedom, just like the rumors were saying about Jesus. That it would be accompanied by healings and miracles, just like the rumors were saying about Jesus. And Jesus finishes reading this document. He steps to the side and he sits down. And in those days, sitting down meant the sermon was about to begin. Maybe I should sit down too so the camera doesn't have to follow me as I pace around so much. But I'm not going to do that. But Jesus did. That was what that meant. So he sits down. And the first words he says is, "It's me. Hi, I'm the Messiah. It's me." And can you imagine what would have been felt in that moment? I'm sure you could have heard a pin drop. I'm sure it was utter silence as this group of people who were friends, who were family, who had known Jesus since he was 9 years old, are watching this guy that they played kickball with in between chores in the backyard claim, "I'm the Messiah. I'm God." What would that take for you to believe that? Probably a lot, if you grew up around him. Well, how did they respond? Let's find out. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Okay, so far so good. That sounds wonderful. They like it, they understand it, but one more sentence gets added. Let's add that sentence back in. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Now, why is that question significant? Because if you're familiar with the Christmas story, you know he's not Joseph's son. Yeah, he was born of Mary, Joseph's wife. And yeah, Joseph is his adopted father. But the people of Nazareth almost certainly grew up hearing the Christmas story. They almost certainly had heard from Mary about the wise men and the shepherds. And by asking, "Is this Joseph's son?" Luke, the author, who only a few short chapters earlier told us the Christmas story, is letting us know that Nazareth doesn't believe it. Nazareth believes this is Joseph's son, a human. And in fact, this story is recorded in 3 of the 4 Gospels, and Mark adds some extra details on and some extra dialogue that the people say. And this is how Mark records it. He says, "Where did this man get these things?" the people asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter?" The people of Nazareth can't look past Jesus as Joseph's son, as a mere carpenter, to see the rabbi, to see the Messiah right in front of them. The people who knew Jesus most understood him least. These folks that got to enjoy 21 years with Jesus, that we have one story of during that time, missed him completely and closed the door to who he was and claimed to be. And I should have known. And as I hear that, I have a couple emotional reactions inside of me. On the one hand, I get it, because like I said a second ago, what would it take for you to believe that someone you grew up with was the Messiah? I understand it. I've got brothers. My older brother has a PhD in philosophy, and so he and I, when we get together for Christmas, we tend to debate a lot of big questions in life, whether it's philosophy or theology or Bible or politics. We love to get into these big discussions about this stuff, and we both enjoy it and love it and respect each other and make each other stronger. But here's the thing. I give him no credit for it. He has a PhD, y'all. He is one of the most educated people in the country on these topics. He gets no credit with me. To me, he's just my brother. That's all he is. But the same is true in the reverse. If we're talking about some Bible passage, like I've dedicated my life to understanding and explaining the Bible well, but if he disagrees with me on how to say a passage, I get no credit for my training and education. That's just how it works with brothers. And we all know that is true in your families as well. It's true in every family. So on the one hand, I get it. But I have a second reaction, and that is I'm actually a little bit mad, like angry at these folks, because I didn't get those 21 years that they did. And they squandered it. The disciples didn't get those 21 years. And Nazareth wastes it. But if I'm honest, my biggest emotional reaction as I read through that story is I'm terrified. Because if Nazareth missed who Jesus was, what hope do I have? They knew him better and deeper than just about anybody. And they missed it. Like, I grew up in church. I've known Jesus since before I was in kindergarten. And obviously not in the same way Nazareth did, in the sense of literally standing next to me, flesh and blood, but in the sense of being raised in the church, in the sense of growing up, knowing who Jesus was and having a Christian education from an early age, and then being involved in every church camp and activity that there was to be involved in. I've always been involved in. I've grown up with Jesus. Then I went to Bible college, and now I'm a pastor. Jesus has been a continual part of my life. But if Nazareth missed him, how do I know I'm not? And that scares me. And I think what I've realized is that it's not that Nazareth missed everything about Jesus. They knew a lot of things about him that were true and accurate. But the problem was that they had a caricature of who Jesus was, and they weren't willing to expand on it, to grow. They were inflexible. Their opinions couldn't change. They had an understanding that wasn't willing to grow as they encountered who Jesus was and saw his miracles and heard about these things. They knew who he was. He was a carpenter, and he was nothing more. And they were going to leave Jesus in that box, but Jesus has a tendency to break out of all of our boxes, doesn't he? I remember when I was a freshman in college, and I had a particular class. It was called Introduction to the Old Testament. Great class. Loved that professor. I took him in every class that I could. And in that class, we had to read a book. We had to read books from a variety of different perspectives, and one of them was presenting a particular way to interpret the Old Testament. And I did not care for this theory whatsoever. I rejected it wholesale. In fact, I found it offensive and thought no good-hearted Christian should ever believe in this theory. It's just that wrong. And so I wrote papers attacking this theory and trying to defend from it. Well, fast forward the clock a decade later, and I'm reading through the Old Testament. I own Bible studies, and I'm listening to podcasts about it, and I'm poring over commentaries and trying to understand it. And I realized that somewhere in the last decade, through all the conversations I've had and growth I've had and information I've gleaned, I now believe in that theory. The very theory that I rejected when I was in that class. Because I've grown and changed. And can I tell you, that is a painful process. It is painful to grow and to change in your faith when you touch that most sacred part of who we are, our religious beliefs, the things that we believe about ourselves and our God. That's painful. And it's also painful when we watch friends and family members go through that too, when they struggle and wander their way through faith and wrestle it out, what is true and what isn't true. And as they evolve and grow, it is difficult and tricky and hard, but it's also how we grow. It's how we become better. It's how we ensure that we haven't missed the truth that's right in front of us by staying flexible and willing to admit that sometimes we have it wrong, but we're going to be better next time because of it. Well, it's not the end of the story. There's more to it than this. That was only the first half, and sure enough, the people of Nazareth sort of expand and worsen the situation, if that's possible. To recap, here's verse 22. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Isn't this Joseph's son? They asked. Continuing on, Jesus said to them, surely you will quote this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself. And you will tell me, do in your hometown what we have heard you did in Capernaum. The idea being that not only do they not believe Jesus is a miracle worker, but if he is, they feel entitled to his miracles. After all, Jesus, shouldn't your best stuff be for your best friends? And I get this at a base level, right? We've all heard stories of someone who wins the lottery or who becomes a celebrity, and suddenly the friends and people around them start to feel entitled to access to them or special privileges because this person has grown and expanded. And so that is what the people of Nazareth are doing. You've become this great rabbi. Surely, as the people that raised you, as your hometown, heal yourself. Start your healing here in your hometown. Do here what we've heard the stories of Capernaum if you really are the Messiah. But Jesus He tells two stories of times that God healed non-Israelites in the Old Testament. The idea being that he is saying, listen, yes, Israel was God's chosen people, but that doesn't mean they're entitled to everything that God has to offer. It doesn't mean that 100% of God's blessings go there, and it doesn't mean they're entitled to any of his blessings. Similarly, yes, you're my hometown, and that is special, but that doesn't entitle you to my miracles. Well, the people of Nazareth don't like that response. This is how they act. It says all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Y'all, they tried to kill him. Like, listen, I don't know what you're going to go through this Christmas. I don't think you're going to be thrown off a cliff. I'll just go out on a limb and say that. Whatever you're facing, that's probably not going to happen. Jesus has this tendency that people just want to kill him. It happens everywhere. But the first time it happens in his ministry career is here, in his hometown, with most of the people in the audience he's related to, whether through Mary or Joseph or by marriage because different families have intermixed, or friends. They're all people he grew up with and knows. He only moved away from the town to start this preaching tour months prior. Or even weeks, maybe. We don't know exactly the timeline. And yet he's back, and they try to kill the guy. Can you imagine what that would be like to watch your family do that? Terrible, awful, the heartbreak that Jesus must be feeling in this moment. The extreme reaction. And then we get this, one of the weirdest sentences in the Bible, and Jesus just walked away. And you're like, what does that mean? How does that happen? And there's different theories and ideas about what that means. One is that, it's this mob that's formed, so Jesus just kind of slips into the mob and then slips away, and that's very possible. Just gets lost in the chaos. Number two is it's a miracle, and he just kind of disappears. And that would be cool because the idea is, the one miracle that he does do here is him leaving because they reject him. My favorite theory, because it's the funniest, is that back in those days, you were only allowed to walk a certain number of steps on the Sabbath, according to the Pharisees. And a scholar went to this town of Nazareth and counted the number of steps from where the synagogue is to up to the top of this hill that they were going to throw Jesus off of. And wouldn't you know it, it's that exact number of steps. So it's very possible that what happened is this mob forms, takes Jesus all the way up to this hill, and then Jesus just goes, you guys are maxed out. And your Fitbits don't, reset until evening. So, nanner, and just walks away. I'm sorry, I really like to imagine Jesus is very sarcastic. I'll try to be more flexible about that one. Now, I don't know that that's exactly what happened. It's my favorite theory. Maybe that's the true one. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But the point is that they have this extreme reaction because they feel entitled. And up until this point, I get it. I get you grew up with somebody, so it's hard to believe that they're suddenly the Messiah, the Son of God. I get that. I get that you feel entitled to special access to someone you grew up with. That makes sense to me. I understand it. But reacting this extremely, just at face value, that seems like a difficult pill to swallow. But I wish I could tell you it wasn't realistic, but it kind of is. I mean, looking back on, my story of Christmas morning, I'm 7 years old, and I'm willing to blow up Christmas because I feel like I'm entitled to Christmas at 8, not 8:30. I'm entitled. Not a big deal. Half hour at a time, not a big deal. Now you might just say, well, that's, you're 7. That's what happens when you're 7. And that's true, but if I'm honest, even in my adult life, one of the biggest struggles of my life has been comparison. Has been going, God, why do some people have things that I don't? Wishing I had giftings that I don't have. Forgetting that a gift means you don't deserve it and you're not owed it. If I was entitled to a gift, it wouldn't be a gift, it'd be a paycheck. Giftings are things we're given as a blessing. And yet I feel entitled and want things that weren't mine to have. I wish I had blessings I don't have, wishing for God to take away pains that he doesn't, or seeing what God has done for other people and wondering why he hasn't done the same for me. And I'm not saying we can't ask for things. I'm not saying that's wrong. I don't think that at all. I don't think it's wrong for us to go, God, please. I don't think it's wrong for us to struggle and to wrestle through the balance of why does God let some things happen this time and not other times? Why has God done this for this person but not for me? I don't think it's wrong to wrestle. After all, Israel literally means wrestles with God because that's what faith is. Faith is us wrestling our way through life with God, through all the ups and downs and struggles and things in between. All I'm saying is that I'm not entitled to God. All I'm saying is let's remember that God didn't have to do any of this. God didn't have to do Christmas, but he did. He didn't have to be born flesh and blood to know hunger and thirst, pains and the difficulties of life, but he did. He didn't have to do the cross. He didn't have to die the most painful form of death ever devised by humans, but he did. He didn't have to take on the sins of the world. He didn't owe that to us, but he did. He didn't have to promise me eternity in paradise, but he did. God didn't have to found the church, the greatest human force for peace, justice, and charity the earth has ever seen, but he did. God didn't have to bless me with the amazing life experiences I've gotten to have, but he did. He just keeps blessing. And at any point, it would have been enough that by rights I should stop and spend every waking moment praising his holy name. If he had stopped at creating me, it would have been enough. If he had stopped at saving my soul, it would have been enough. If he had stopped at creating the church, it would have been enough. If he had stopped at sending the Holy Spirit to live within me and guide me in life, it would have been enough. If he had stopped at the numerous blessings in my life, it would have been enough. But he keeps blessing. So we approach our asking and our wrestling with humility, remembering who God is and the depths of what he has done for us. Nazareth missed it. Nazareth missed Jesus because they had a caricature of Jesus, not the real thing. And they weren't flexible. They weren't willing to change it. They weren't willing to adjust. The evidence of it was right in front of their own eyes, and they refused to see it. They were so certain. Let's not do that. Let's approach our conversations, even with people that we disagree with or we struggle with an air of what can I learn because I understand I don't have 100% of the truth. I have a lot and I'm confident in the things that I know, but that doesn't mean that I have everything. So when I approach a conversation, I can ask, what do I have to learn from this? Not just what do I have to teach in this. And what we find is that when we're talking through controversial subjects and we start by saying, what can I learn versus how can I convince, we find the other person far more able to listen to us in the first place, and we found that we have grown, and growing is far better. Nazareth missed it because they weren't flexible. Of course, they were also entitled. They felt that because they raised Jesus, they owned Jesus and his miracles. They chose to ignore humility. Let's not do that. When we're struggling, when we're questioning God, let's be open to that. Let's wrestle out our faith with God. Let's ask, let's wrestle, but let's approach it with humility. Remembering that God is a God who loves to bless his kids, but it's a blessing, not an entitlement. And remember the amazing riches with which he has already blessed us with. Jesus wasn't just Nazareth's friend, cousin, and carpenter. He was their God, and they couldn't see it. They missed it. They closed the door, and they put a keep out sign on it. And you know, Jesus was from Nazareth. He spent 21 years there. According to what we have recorded, at least, he never goes back. Because the one time he went, they tried to kill him. They closed the door. Let's not do that. Let's keep the door open. Let's choose humility. And maybe through every struggle and every change in perspective that brings, we'll grow. We're becoming more than we were yesterday, and by the time heaven calls us home, we'll stand before God, and we won't miss what Nazareth missed. And when we arrive at the place where God wipes every tear from our eyes and we can ask him all the questions on our hearts face to face and walk with him through every difficulty, we know Jesus will welcome us home in the way Nazareth should have welcomed him, with flags and fanfare. Let me pray. Almighty God, I'm thankful that you bestow upon us blessing after blessing after blessing. God, when I think you're done, you just keep going. And yet sometimes I find in myself the desire to shake my fist and say, yes, but what about this one? What about one more? God, I pray that I would be humble, seeing you as God and Master, not the other way around. God, I pray that I would stay flexible, knowing that the things I know about you today are not all of who you are. You go far beyond my understanding, and the second I've put you in a box is the second you explode out of it. Help me to stay humble, God. Help all of us to choose humility this Christmas season. And in your name I pray, amen.